Combined arms. Combined arms.
Combined arms. It's a combined arms game.
Combined arms ethos.
Combined arms.
By now, most of us have heard Cloud Imperium Games use the phrase combined arms. They have been throwing it around for years, long before Theaters of War was even a thing. But despite all the talk, CIG has never actually tested real combined arms gameplay in Star Citizen. And looking at the current, and even planned, state of the game, it is hard to see how combined arms could ever truly work. In this video, we are going to break down what combined arms actually means, how it has been implemented successfully in other games, the challenges CIG will face trying to make it work, and whether Star Citizen is even capable of delivering on that promise. If you play Star Citizen, chances are you already have a general idea of what combined arms means in a real-world military context. But this video is not about doctrine or tactics from actual warfare. This is a video about games, and how the concept of combined arms plays out within them. Over the years, some games have executed combined arms gameplay incredibly well, while others have fallen short. Games like World War II Online, Planetside 1, Project Reality, Squad, and Hell Let Loose are examples of titles that, in my opinion, got it right. None of these games are ultra-realistic simulations, but they do share key traits. They are infantry-focused, feature air and armored units, and most importantly, design their objectives and systems in a way that forces these unit types to work together. Let us break down the key elements that successful combined arms games have in common. Number 1. Objectives that require combined arms. In Star Citizen, there are no objectives that require players to coordinate air, armor, and infantry. Even events that were supposed to promote combined arms, like Jumptown or the mining operations, are typically resolved by whoever can establish air superiority first and start dropping bombs. There is rarely, if ever, a meaningful reason to use ground forces unless you're just role-playing. Even if an objective is located inside a structure, a player can simply hop out of their fighter, walk inside, and deal with it themselves. There is no necessity for ground vehicles or infantry coordination. This is a fundamental problem we will revisit later. Number 2. Player-controlled respawn system. Every game needs a respawn system, but in the games I mentioned earlier, that system is something players can influence, either by building forward bases, capturing control points, or using support vehicles. This is vital. If a tank or squad of infantry is destroyed, how do they return to the fight? Can players build structures to support reinforcements? Do vehicles such as the Kraken and Ironclad act as a mobile respawn point for aerospace, ground vehicles, and infantry? Without a flexible, player-driven respawn system, battles in Star Citizen remain shallow and short-lived. Combined arms requires persistence, fights that ebb and flow over time, and that can only happen when respawn systems support it. Number 3. Infantry are the focus, vehicles support them. This is where Star Citizen faces a major design hurdle. In most successful combined arms games, infantry is the backbone of the gameplay, and vehicles exist to support infantry in achieving objectives. Star Citizen, however, is a space game first. That emphasis on aerospace has created an environment where vehicles, and especially aircraft, tend to replace infantry rather than support them. Dropping a bomb on a bunker isn't combined arms. Escorting a bomber with a fighter isn't combined arms. That's just basic air combat. Combined arms means that one class, say infantry, requires help from another, like armor or air, to succeed. That relationship doesn't currently exist in Star Citizen, but it could, and this video will explore how. Number 4. Anti-air needs to be brutal. This is a crucial element that many games, and Star Citizen in particular, struggle with. In any game that includes air power, the anti-aircraft systems must be brutally effective. They should be able to establish no-fly zones, deny airspace, and force players to coordinate combined arms attacks to clear AA before they can safely bring in air support. Without this balance, air units dominate the battlefield, and there's no reason to ever use tanks or infantry. In Star Citizen, aerospace is already overwhelmingly powerful, and bombs are devastating. Unless CIG makes anti-air defenses strong and oppressive, air power will continue to trivialize every objective. It is important to understand that video games can only capture the spirit of combined arms, not its real-world complexity. You cannot force good combined arms gameplay through sheer will or by mimicking military realism. Take Arma, for example. That franchise sacrifices fun and mechanics in pursuit of realism, and the result is often unbalanced vehicle play, either too strong or completely underwhelming. That's not good design. That's not good gameplay. Now that we have laid the foundation for what video game combined arms is, and why it works in some games but not in others, let us turn our attention back to Star Citizen and what it would take to make combined arms gameplay viable. Like almost everything in Star Citizen, combined arms isn't just underdeveloped, it's a massive time sink for virtually no payoff. When was the last time you actually tried to load a ground vehicle into a ship? Let me walk you through what is currently the safest and least time-consuming method. First, you head to a hangar and either call or claim your ground vehicle. You wait through the hangar elevator animation, run over to the vehicle, hop inside, and drive it somewhere off the elevator pad just to keep it from despawning. Then, you run all the way back to the ASOP terminal, where you call in a specific ship that's actually compatible with the vehicle you want to load. Now, you wait through another elevator animation. Run to the ship, open its ramp, get back to your ground vehicle, and carefully, very carefully, drive it inside. Assuming the vehicle doesn't glitch, explode, or somehow clip through the hull, you're now finally ready to take off and begin whatever it is you're hoping to do with combined arms. But if you're destroyed on the way there, whether by another player, a physics bug, server desync, or anything else, you get to start the entire process over from scratch. Now compare that to claiming a Gladius. You call it in, fly off, and destroy whatever's on the ground easily. No prep time, no logistics, no fragility, just point, click, and delete. Ground vehicles cannot defend themselves from fighters. In fact, most of them can't defend themselves at all. And now, thanks to the addition of bombs, even light fighters like the Gladius can level entire convoys or fortified positions effortlessly. Not that it was hard before. This contrast highlights the real issue. Star Citizen punishes you for trying to use combined arms. It burdens you with time, friction, and risk, and offers no gameplay payoff in return. One solution, one very basic first step, is to cut down on the overwhelming prep time it takes to even attempt combined arms. This wouldn't magically make combined arms gameplay meaningful or fun. That's a deeper problem. But it would at least make it viable for players to try it in the first place without wasting half an hour of setup just to get instantly bombed by a light fighter. Ships capable of carrying ground vehicles, like the Hercules M2, should be claimable with preloaded vehicles already inside. Think like how the Constellation comes with its little snub fighter. Ideally, this could be handled through the Vehicle Manager app. Let's say you own a Centurion and a Ballista. You open the Vehicle Manager, select your M2, and slot those two vehicles into the ship's internal loadout. When you retrieve the M2, it comes with both vehicles already inside, ready to deploy. Naturally, the claim cost would reflect the added value of the vehicles, and insurance systems could factor that in. But the point is to eliminate all of the pointless back and forth and allow players to actually play the game. This is about more than just convenience. If you reduce the time tax on using ground vehicles, you remove a huge barrier to spontaneous, emergent gameplay. Players will be more willing to try things, even if those things are imperfect. Right now, you are punished for thinking outside the box. You are punished for trying to play differently. Fixing that, even just a little, opens the door to experimentation, to learning, and eventually to better gameplay loops that support combined arms for real. But until then, combined arms will remain what it is now, a fantasy that's talked about but never experienced. Have you ever tried to use a ground vehicle on any planet in Star Citizen? It is a complete exercise in frustration. Every single planet features a sea of rocks that, for some reason, must have collision enabled and prevent you from driving without constant stops or micro corrections. Most objects you run into will bring you to an immediate halt. It does not matter if it is a small tree hitting a Nova tank. You are not an unstoppable force, but you have just hit an immovable object. Again, contrast this with flying around in a ship. The most you really have to avoid is hitting an asteroid in space, or perhaps a tree if you are flying low on a planet that has trees. You understand the point I am making here, correct? Everything related to ground vehicles in Star Citizen is currently an absolute chore and simply not enjoyable to use. Thankfully, I have a simple solution for this as well. Just remove collision from ground vehicles against most objects on planets. Ironically, they have already done this for a lot of the shrubs and vegetative debris on planets. But they could also reduce or tone down the number of rocks and clutter. However, it would be much easier to simply allow your tank to drive through most objects as if they were not there. You would, of course, make exceptions for very large rocks or trees. However, very large rocks and trees are the least common obstacles that block your path. It is, once again, just a sea of small, annoying rocks and debris. Do you know what game had a similar problem and managed to work around it? Hell Let Loose. Tanks were mostly useless unless the developers allowed them to seamlessly drive through small fences, small objects, and very tiny trees. It was an abstract and simple solution that instantly made tanks in that game usable. Star Citizen could do the same thing here and immediately improve the experience at absolutely no cost. When I am discussing dropships, I am not only referring to infantry using them, but also the ground vehicles being deployed from them. Infantry without some form of ground support will be ineffective. So if CIG is truly interested in combined arms, we need to consider ground vehicles accompanying the infantry. With that understood, ask yourself this. What makes a dropship in the game currently? Every ship has an interior. As long as it can carry people inside of it, it can perform the function of a dropship. When our organization does something with infantry, we fly them around and deliver them with a terrapin. It is not a dropship by design, but it is quite good at being one. Therefore, dropships need something to differentiate themselves from other ships. Everyone, including CIG, knows dropships are worthless. They have attempted to address this by increasing their health and performance, and in some cases improving their weapon systems. But none of these changes address the real reason dropships are ineffective. They need to land in order to do their job. Because they need to land, they either need to be durable to a ridiculous degree, where multiple fighters cannot reliably destroy them, or stealthy enough that no one can detect them. I have a couple of solutions to this problem. The first is the most obvious one, and it is something CIG is already doing: increasing durability. This sounds great on paper, but let us consider how important these dropships are for actually enabling combined arms combat in this game. Remember when I said Star Citizen has a unique problem compared to other combined arms games because it is primarily an aerospace-focused game rather than a ground-focused one? That problem extends to dropships as well. Without dropships being a viable method for transporting infantry and vehicles to a location, there could never be true combined arms gameplay. Why would anyone invest in ground forces when one can fill an area with aerospace fighters that deny dropships entry altogether? Even if a dropship somehow manages to land, aerospace fighters will descend upon it and destroy it with ease. Additionally, the distribution of forces needed to protect the dropship while also conducting combined arms gameplay is heavily skewed in favor of aerospace units. Allow me to present a scenario that may help illustrate the problem more clearly. In this scenario, we have a fully crewed Valkyrie, a pilot, and 4 gunners. For the sake of this example, let us disregard the relatively useless door gunners. Inside the Valkyrie are 20 fully equipped soldiers and 1 medevac with a driver to serve as a mobile respawn point. That brings the total number of players in this one vehicle to 26. That number rivals the required crew size of some capital ships. Keep that in mind. Since this vehicle is completely defenseless and must be escorted to the surface of a planet to complete its objective, it has been assigned a wing of 3 Gladius aerospace fighters as escorts. We now have a total of 29. How many players do you think are required to stop this assault? An equal number? Not at all. You do not need to bring 29 aerospace fighters to fend this off. You could bring as few as 10, rush the dropship, and kill everyone on board. It does not even matter if you lose most of your fighters in the process, as long as those 25 players on that Valkyrie die. Your mission is complete. What is the solution here? Do we increase the health of the Valkyrie to make it as durable as a capital ship? It may have capital ship level player capacity, but it certainly does not have capital ship durability. By now, you should understand that no amount of reasonable, and that's the key word here, okay, is reasonable durability increase will solve the primary issue every dropship in Star Citizen faces. They need to land in order to do their job. This scenario should once again highlight the core imbalance and fundamental misunderstanding that CIG has regarding player distribution in a combined arms game. It is a mix of poor force multipliers, bad design choices, and unrealistic expectations about how players behave in games. So, if the issue with dropships in Star Citizen is that they must land to be useful, the solution is simple. Allow them to perform their role without landing. If dropships could allow vehicles and infantry to exit while in flight and in atmosphere without taking fall damage, they could actually facilitate the beginnings of combined arms operations. I have actually gone ahead and managed to replicate a rough example of how it could work if something like this were implemented into the game. By using a folding chair, a tractor beam, and a friend, you can throw somebody sitting in the chair out of the back of a ship. They will safely land on the ground. This silly procedure actually ends up making the dropship far more useful than it currently is. I am not suggesting anything as complex or development heavy as lore-based drop pods. I am talking about something as simple as making all infantry and vehicles that exit a dropship immune to fall and collision damage until they hit the ground. For the sake of visual fidelity, you could add a grav shoot effect, a glowing trail that follows the units as they descend. The key point is that you want to enable ground forces to reach the surface and begin their roll without the need to land the dropship. And if your idea or solution is to fly the dropship 10 kilometers away from an objective, land, and then make everyone walk or drive the rest of the way, your idea is significantly less fun, significantly less cool, and vastly less effective than what I am proposing here. Remember how I said that AA has to be brutal for combined arms to function in a game? The opposite is currently the case in Star Citizen. Much like turrets on ships, AA is an absolute joke and does not even begin to do its job. In fact, it is actually worse than ship turrets because at least turrets on ships are attached to something that can maneuver and escape. Ground AA is stuck on the planet. It cannot repair, it cannot reposition, and it cannot escape. It just sucks all around. It feels like it was built for a version of the game that does not exist, and may never exist. But enough being a doomer. Let us take a look at the problems the ground AA options currently have. Here we're in a Centurion. You can see similar problems that we have here, like we have in space on turrets, we have on the ground. Gladius is approaching. He can see me, I can see him. He doesn't have to do this. I begin to fire. Even in atmosphere, we're not getting reliable hits. And the gun is kind of hard to aim. But this is where things get bad. The turret just breaks. The lock-on thing doesn't work. You can see me kind of fiddling with it here. I'm trying to get it to work. It still does not work. But this is more important. Look at this. I cannot actually aim up and hit him. He's above my gun. I tell him to come down, so I try and get a lock. I can't get a lock. He's playing by my rules for the purpose of this test. But this is my maximum value of elevation right there. Look at that. He's above me. I can't hit him. I can't do nothing. And this is an AA vehicle. This scenario is even funnier. I'm in a ballista. I cannot even get a lock on with the missiles. He's way too close, even at 4,000 meters away. He has to go out to about 5,000 kilometers for me to be able to get a lock. 5,000, and then I get a lock. He can close in at any time he wants. And then I just lose a lock anyway. So there you go, I just lost a lock. And then, much like the Centurion, not only do the missiles not work, but if you see here, he can very easily get above my elevation, and now I can't do anything to him. So again, an anti-aircraft vehicle that cannot aim up. And now to add insult to injury here, CIG has given the Gladius bombing racks, and you can see here he's just going to toy with me. I'm still struggling with the lock-on. I got what just there, still not. Boom, he's up above me. And where's the bomb at? And here comes the bomb. Wow. Very nice. So now we have aircrafts countering anti-aircraft weapons. Very good design. That is all pretty bad. Fortunately, the solutions to these problems are fairly straightforward. Let us start with the Centurion. The Centurion needs to have a significantly higher capacitor. Think about what they did with the Hammerhead, and apply that same logic to the Centurion. Like all other turrets, the Centurion needs a velocity modifier and possibly a range modifier to allow it to effectively do its job. Having 300 shots means nothing when every one of them is going to miss under the current turret system. The Centurion must also have its dead zone removed. It is an anti-air vehicle and should be capable of doing its job without weaknesses against the very ships it is meant to counter. Give it perfect coverage. That includes aiming directly above the turret. If the Centurion is meant to serve as SHORAD, the ballista is unquestionably HIMAD, but it cannot do its job due to a terrible minimum range, a low missile count, and the general ineffectiveness of missiles. Ballista missiles need to have their minimum lock-on range significantly reduced, or better yet, removed entirely. while their maximum effective and lock-on ranges need to be increased, along with missile velocity. This is currently not possible in Star Citizen because every weapon behaves the same regardless of the platform it is on. However, as with everything else, simple modifier changes based on the chassis could resolve this. Unfortunately, that is up to CIG. Unless they are willing to design bespoke missiles specifically for the ballista, which might be more work than necessary and far more time-consuming, we are out of luck unless they use modifiers. The ballista needs a larger missile payload, as well as a reliable way to rearm in the field. I do not care how this is implemented. Ideally, the simpler and more abstract the resupply system is, the better. If rearming requires too much effort or the vehicle is not worth using in terms of performance, players simply will not bother. And that is something that people who demand endless realism and high fidelity physicalization need to understand. This is a game. A game is a collection of lights, colors, and sounds. Good gameplay and solid mechanics must take precedence over everything else. The current state of ground AA is a perfect example of why. The ballista, like the Centurion, also needs its dead zone removed. Again, why is a dedicated anti-air vehicle unable to effectively aim upwards at its targets? That's where its targets are going to be. They're going to be up. In another game, one actually built for combined arms from the start, without wasting time on frivolous realism and immersion concerns, I could see the Centurion and Ballista forming a near impenetrable air defense system, one so effective that ground forces would be absolutely required to clear them before any aircraft could ever even consider approaching. Sadly, Star Citizen is not that game, and because of that, these vehicles are terrible. You may be noticing a pattern with all of these suggestions. They mirror the same issues that plague crewed turrets on ships. Not enough coverage, projectile velocity is too low, and impractical design that makes them inferior to simply using a ship. Without serious and fundamental changes, I do not see ground-based AA ever becoming a viable way to protect ground forces. And as long as AA remains weak and pathetic, combined arms gameplay will remain impossible. I have already mentioned several times throughout this video that AA must be highly effective in order for combined arms to work. However, this topic is so important that it deserves its own chapter. In games that feature aircraft, there is always some form of anti-aircraft weaponry. That probably sounds obvious, I know. But stay with me here. If the AA in the game is weak, it leads to players deploying multiple AA units just to counter a single aircraft. This leaves those AA units highly vulnerable to ground forces and completely throws off the balance of the battlefield. However, if AA is extremely effective, and you are welcome to choose whatever word you want to describe it, I am going to use the word brutal to drive the point home. If the AA is brutal, then less of it is required, and players will be far less likely to try to brute force their way through it with an aircraft. This is especially critical in Star Citizen because, as we all know, it is a space game. Unlike other games that feature combined arms, in Star Citizen, everyone has a spaceship. In fact, you currently need a spaceship just to get a ground vehicle to the surface where it might actually do its job. But here is the core concept that must be understood. AA must be so effective that if even one piece of AA is active and operational in a zone, aircraft will not risk engaging it. You will not try to poke it. You will not try to test it. You will not take a few shots to your shield and then skillfully retreat. You will be shot, you will be destroyed, and you will wake up in a medbed. Anything short of AA being that effective means the entire combined arms concept for a video game will fail. This is not about punishing light fighter pilots, although that may sound entertaining. The purpose is to enforce a strategic structure where aircraft dominance is not the only viable option. Brutal AA ensures that players must consider other tactics. It creates the conditions where combined arms, something CIG claims to be deeply invested in, can actually happen. If AA is brutal, and if the only reliable way to remove it is to send ground forces to take it out, then you have just created a real opportunity for emergent gameplay. You now have a system where infantry and vehicles must play a role in the success of aerospace units, and vice versa. That is the core of combined arms. If the A-2 bomber is the waking nightmare for every player on the ground, then the Centurion and any other ground-based AA must become that same nightmare for every aerospace pilot. Unless that level of threat can be achieved, combined arms in Star Citizen will never happen. For some reason, everything in Star Citizen always comes back to a respawn system. Longtime viewers will know this is something I have been discussing for years now. However, a respawn system extends far beyond just a player waking up in a bed with armor and a rifle. How can we facilitate the use of vehicles in combined arms combat if we cannot replenish losses and keep the battle going? What use do massive ships like the Kraken and Ironclad serve if they cannot help sustain a battlefield? During last year's CitizenCon, CIG hosted a panel where they showcased the redesigned Pioneer and its ability to manufacture a Nomad.
Next to that is the fabrication control room. This is where you'll be fabricating larger vehicles and ships. In the center of the ship, we have a small fabrication hangar with roof and ramp egress. So if you're building a small ship on board, so things like a Nomad, you can build on board here. You'll be able to fly it out the roof of the fabrication hangar.
This made me realize that CIG may actually be open to embracing good gameplay mechanics, breaking free from the shackles of realism and fidelity, and instead focusing on designs that prioritize gameplay. If the Pioneer can spawn Nomads on the fly, then why can something like the Ironclad not spawn ground vehicles and soldiers? Why can capital ships such as the Polaris, Idris, or Kraken not spawn pilots and fighters? Now, before anyone rushes to correct me in the comments, yes, I am aware they used the word craft in the video. However, I am going to continue using the term respawn. There are several reasons why the game could, and absolutely should, extend this mechanic to other large ships. Number one, it turns large vehicles into mobile bases and dynamic combat objectives. This gives the enemy something tangible and important to attack, and it gives the defending team a meaningful way to stay in the fight. Everything in Star Citizen dies quickly. Do you really expect players to load an Idris with a few Gladiuses, fly out, get them destroyed, and then respawn far away just to repeat the entire process? Perhaps you do, but that is not enjoyable gameplay. The same logic applies to ground vehicles. Do you expect players to load up an M2 with tanks or Spartans, deploy them, and then repeat the entire logistical loop once they are destroyed? Perhaps, but again, that is not fun. At present, both options require far too much time and effort for far too little payoff. That is exactly why, for more than 6 years now, most players have simply spawned a light fighter and flown back to the objective. Number 2, it enables real, systemic battles regardless of what the game wants. Something as basic as Jump Town, a weak objective by design, can become a multi-hour long battle if ships are capable of spawning soldiers and vehicles. Imagine a Kraken or Ironclad acting as a forward operating base, protected by anti-air defenses, continuously deploying Spartans filled with troops and sustaining a fight that ebbs and flows. The same applies in space. If capital ships can respawn light fighters, you get prolonged battles without constant breaks in momentum. None of this happens because of scripted events. It happens because the respawn system allows it to happen. The type of respawn system I'm talking about here is creating that dynamic, emergent gameplay. Number 3. Ships with hangars currently have no viable role, so give them one. To be entirely honest, there will probably never be a practical use for large ships with hangars unless it is the role I am describing here. Even in Pyro, the largest system we currently have, any ship can cross it. Refueling stations are everywhere, so the idea of using carriers as transport ships for light fighter pilots who are just going to go AFK during long trips seems like a really bad and stupid idea. What an awful use of a carrier just to chauffeur other players around. However, if ships like the Kraken or Ironclad could respawn vehicles, they would finally serve a meaningful purpose, a defined gameplay role, a reason to exist beyond being concept art for a game that does not yet support them. Star Citizen needs to begin making meaningful concessions in order to enable better gameplay. If CIG wants to see more tactics than everyone spawn a light fighter and rush the point, then they need to give players the tools and systems that support deeper strategic gameplay and thought. The battles where teams fight over supply lines, vehicle spawns, and mobile bases only become possible when vehicles can be respawned, just like the players who use them. Jumptown has always exemplified how one-sided and repetitive Star Citizen's combat can become. While OLPs and the Karenite farms were slightly better, it was only due to Tier 0 medical respawn mechanics and proximity to nearby stations. If those objectives had not been within 2 jumps of a spawn point, nobody would have bothered to fight there. Period. And for those who believe the Align and Mind event had better PvP activity than Jumptown, which it absolutely did, you should take a moment to consider why. It all came down to ease of access, nearby respawns, and reduced friction thanks to Tier 0 respawn mechanics. So long as a single player can drop an A2 bomb on ground forces will never have a purpose. It truly is that simple. Now that other ships are receiving bombs via wing-mounted racks, we must understand that if everything can simply be bombed from the air, there will never be a point to any ground combat. I do not care if, in real life, air superiority means everything. This is not real life. This is a game. And for any game to function properly, there must be engaging and meaningful gameplay. We have already covered why powerful, ground-based anti-air systems are important, but let us move on to one final piece of the puzzle. Completely separate objectives that vehicles cannot, in any way, shape, or form, access. Things such as space stations, bunkers, and facilities. Whatever the form, must exist. Perhaps even planets or environments so hostile to aerospace that flying in them is simply not feasible. Star Citizen has attempted ideas like this in the past with events such as Jumptown or Ghost Hollow, but the reality is that there was no true combined arms involved in those scenarios. Aerospace could simply overwhelm the area, destroy everything from the sky, bomb the facility, and then land to clear out any remaining opposition. All past and present objectives intended to support or test combined arms have been largely ineffective. Shockingly, the now defunct and rarely used distribution centers would make for excellent combined arms combat environments, where infantry and vehicles battle across the exterior of a facility and then transition into interior combat where only infantry can operate. Sadly, these are now just glorified PvE cargo zones with no meaningful point or purpose. However, if they were reused, redesigned, and repurposed for combined arms warfare, they would undoubtedly be among the best objectives in the game, offering a compelling and enjoyable combat environment for players interested in that style of gameplay. At the very least, CIG should take a look at them and recognize why they would make excellent facilities for players to fight over. They feature a large, open outer perimeter where ground vehicles could thrive, helping to facilitate the vehicle-based element of combined arms warfare. They are also surrounded by a perimeter of turrets that engage vehicles, serving as an additional layer of objectives for players to contend with. As players move closer to the facility, they encounter smaller structures and buildings that would provide ideal locations for spawn points, side objectives, and mixed infantry vehicle engagements. And finally, the closer one gets to the central facility, the more the environment favors infantry-only combat zones. These inner areas are inaccessible to vehicles, ensuring that any fighting here is done strictly by foot soldiers. It has a very clear start, middle, and end. All three components of combined arms gameplay can be supported using the layout and design of distribution centers. They are already in the game, and I do not believe CIG even realizes the potential they hold. What a shame. For many years, Cloud Imperium Games has used the term combined arms when describing Star Citizen's gameplay. However, the only true connection Star Citizen currently has with that concept is the mere presence of vehicles. That is where the similarities end. There are no meaningful interactions between infantry, ground vehicles, and aerospace forces. There is no reason for them to interact, no design incentives that force cooperation, and no systems in place that facilitate or sustain that style of gameplay. The result is a shallow, disconnected battlefield where each element, on foot, on wheels, or in the air, operates largely in isolation. This lack of integration is concerning. I fear that, given the game's current design philosophy, the self-imposed limitations around immersion and fidelity, and the almost complete absence of targeted testing for combined arms mechanics, we are unlikely to ever see Star Citizen deliver a truly robust combined arms experience, especially when compared to other titles that have been far more successful in that area. Games like Planetside 1 and World War II Online, and to a slight degree Planetside 2, which I am not a huge fan of, have long since demonstrated how to blend infantry, armor, and air power into cohesive battles that rely on coordination and logistical support. Star Citizen, on the other hand, continues to treat each element as if it exists in a vacuum, and as a result, it lacks the emergent strategy, dynamic objectives, and battlefield cohesion that make combined arms gameplay rewarding and honestly super addicting. I hope I am wrong. Truly, I do. Nothing would make me happier than to be proven wrong by a test event or a new patch or even an interview, whatever, that brings these systems together in a meaningful way. But what I do know, without a doubt, is that if we do not get a way to test these systems soon, we never will. Without iteration, feedback, and real-world gameplay trials, any future attempt to implement combined arms will fall flat. It will be unbalanced, uncoordinated, and ultimately ignored by the player base in favor of simpler, more effective tactics such as spawning a light fighter and rushing an objective. And it has always been a great irony to me, is that the people who are against mechanics that would increase strategy and planning such as dynamic respawns and true combined arms, think that simply sitting in a fighter and ordering everybody to go to one location is the pinnacle of organization. How silly they truly are. Time is running out. Star Citizen needs to make testing combined arms a priority before the opportunity to get it right passes by completely. If you're still here, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and have a good day or night.